6 identical laughs, 2 mirrored smiles, a Sunday that seemed like any other. 14 years later, the earth gave back what the city had tried to forget. 2 forms, side by side, a backpack between them like a silent pact. The path from the stage's glow to the hole in the avenue is too short for those left behind, and far too long for those who search. This is the passage of the Cavalcante sisters, told through the traces that survived the Fortaleza sun and the all-consuming mud. Sunday smelled of brewed coffee and bread sizzling on the griddle, the sound crackling from the frying pan as the kitchen radio hissed out old news. In Messejana, the Cavalcante's simple house had woken with its doors open. A warm wind blew from the front gate to the service area, lifting the lace curtain in the living room. Letícia and Lorena, 17 years old, were already moving about as if their own skin was too small to contain them. Their father pretended to read yesterday's newspaper, but his eyes kept drifting back to his daughters. Their mother measured time in spoonfuls of sugar, trying to mask her apprehension. It was the day of the festival in the side parking lot of the Castelão stadium, and the girls had been begging to go for weeks. They promised to be back early, to send messages, to answer their calls, the promises of obedient daughters wrapped in the anxiety of wanting to see a guitar up close. The two of them cut from the same cloth, their matching black Kiss t-shirts, each with Gene Simmons's face, tongue out, had dried on the line the night before. Who grabbed which one became their usual game. They laughed at the silly detail as if it were the only thing that mattered. They pulled on worn-out jeans, white sneakers that were no longer so white, and the old denim backpack, dotted with patches and pins, was passed from one shoulder to the other until it rested on Leticia's. Their mother ran a hand through both their heads of hair, trying to commit the feeling to memory. She even asked about sunscreen, as if a face protected from the sun was a charm against the world. They left around 1 in the afternoon, the thick heat beating down on the asphalt. Cicadas sang in chorus from the sidewalk trees. Messejana has its own noise, a revving motorcycle, the cry of a pomona vendor, the insistent bark of the neighbor's dog. The twins moved through it all as if navigating a familiar map, laughing at a video someone had sent the night before, the phone screen catching their 2 faces in a quick reflection. They caught the crowded bus on the main avenue. They felt the vehicle sway, felt the hot breath of people coming back from the beach and others heading to the same destination. The driver recognized their shirts and made a joke about heavy metal. They smiled, waved, secure in a script that felt like it had been written long ago. When they got off near the Castelão, the day already had the color of late afternoon, even though it was still early. The city vibrates differently when there's music. Street vendors vied for shade, their styrofoam coolers creaking, water bottles sweating in the heat. The smell of charcoal and grilling fat hung in the air from barbecue stalls. In the side lot, the secondary stage stood simply, sound checks echoing, guitars screaming snippets of a chorus. The two entered with paper wristbands. They received stamps that smudged on their sweaty wrists and plunged into the crowd. A classmate from school took their picture in front of a banner. Wide smits, identical hair falling on their shoulders that duplicated Gene Simmons on each of their chests. This image would be shared many times later, with no new update to replace it. Letícia always led the way. She was the one who spoke to the vendors, who pushed to get closer, who mentally noted the set times for each band. Lorena preferred to stay a step behind, but when the music started, she forgot her shyness and headbanged as if no one was watching. In the middle of a chorus, they swapped the backpack. A mirror game, a kind of ritual only they understood. The sky was beginning to pull a pale orange, the light slanting across the concrete, when they decided to circle over to a mini-stage set up for local bands. The sound was raw. The dust rose in eddies, and the water from the coolers was already lukewarm. Around 4 o'clock, Letícia mentioned that their father would call later in the afternoon to see if everything was okay. Their mother had insisted on it in the kitchen, and the phrase returned like a reminder. They checked their phone signal. It was weak, fluctuating. Lorena wanted to send a picture, but the network froze. "We'll call when we leave," they decided. In these small intervals of life, fate often enters silently without a sound. The pair got distracted by a band that mixed covers with original songs, sang along to a familiar chorus, and lost track of time. A security guard walked by, telling them not to push against the barrier. A vendor offered caja popsicles that melted before they could be finished. The sun beat down on the metal equipment, reflecting sparks that stung the eyes. Around 5 p.m., a rumor spread that a more famous act was about to go on the main stage. The crowd began to surge in the opposite direction, the pushing and shoving typical of a festival, people bumping into each other, hurried apologies. Letícia grabbed Lorena's hand, an automatic gesture for those who grew up joined at the hip. The backpack bumped lightly against one shoulder, then the other, until the two bodies were side by side as always. The path to the main stage smelled of hot dust and spilled beer. A boy with a backward cap offered to clear a path. For a moment, the two vanished into the ebb and flow of shoulders and elbows, reappearing further ahead where the sound was booming. At 5:48 p.m., Letícia tried to call her father. The call failed to connect. She frowned, checked the signal again, and raised the phone, trying to catch one more bar. Lorena laughed at the effort and suggested, "We'll talk calmly on the way out." That was the plan. Leave at 8 p.m., catch the same bus, send a text from Padre Pedro de Alencar Avenue, and walk in the door with their shirts stuck to their backs with sweat and their ears ringing. Outside, a breeze lifted dust from the empty parking lot, dragging popcorn wrappers and crumpled flyers. Inside, the vibration from the speakers made the ground tremble. The rest of the afternoon passed the way important afternoons do. Fast, luminous, with the feeling that you are living something you will remember later. The two rested in a patch of shade. They shared a greasy pastry that cost more than it should have. They drank water warmed by the sun. The vendor's cooler dripped at their feet, forming a puddle that later turned to mud. A group asked to take a picture with them because they liked their matching shirts. They posed as if they were right at home. When the music picked up again, stronger this time, the human tide moved once more, and the twins dove back in, confident in the instinct, trained since childhood to stick together. They were separated for a few seconds while skirting a sponsor's tent, then found each other again with a single glance. Meanwhile, back at the house in Messejana, their mother was setting the table for dinner and glancing at the wall clock. Their father put down his newspaper, no longer pretending, and went to the gate to look at the street, a hollow gesture that brings no one back. The afternoon wind carried the smell of distant rain, but there were no clouds in the sky. In Fortaleza, the promise of water sometimes runs through the streets without ever falling from the sky. All that remains is the humid haze rising from the hot ground. They waited for the arranged call. At 6:30 p.m., nothing. At 7 p.m., the father sent a short text, no reply. A vague discomfort filled the living room, the kind of unease no one admits to for fear of giving birth to anguish. At the festival, the stage lights began to take on cool colors, blue and purple, cutting across the faces in the crowd. The paper wristbands were half torn. Letícia secured hers with the strap of the backpack. Lorena commented that their sneakers would need a good scrub. They laughed again, out of habit, out of a need for survival. At some point between one chorus and the next, someone bumped into them harder. A cup fell, A vendor swore. The flow of people split in two. The twins looked at each other and felt it. That silent yes that had always meant, "I'm here." And they were still there. For now they were. When the time came to head home, the exit was flooded with people in a hurry. They walked in that direction without rushing, thinking about the bus they needed to catch. The hunger that only comes with exhaustion. The mild scolding they would get for being late. Letícia felt for the phone in her back pocket. She felt the sweat on the screen and tried to call her father again. The device insisted on not connecting. She raised her arm, searching for a signal. Her face lit by the stage lights while Lorena pointed toward the path where they had entered. It was a labyrinth of fences, tarps, and people. The lead singer's voice echoed between the buildings, the bass thumping back into their chests. A water vendor cut between them, his cooler once again bumping against Lorena's leg. She cursed under her breath. The backpack switched shoulders. They kept going. The last reliable record is that failed call attempt at 5:48 p.m., and the memory of classmates who saw them near the smaller stage shortly after. Everything else from this point on is a void. Some say they saw two identical young women walking toward the open side of the parking lot. Others swear they headed toward the food stalls. No camera caught their steps, no security guard recognized them leaving the area. The twins, who until then had been pure evidence, clothing, smiles, photos, affection, began to turn into silence. This is how a disappearance begins, first as a delay, then as a question, and finally as a dark room where time stands still. At the Cavalcante house, the clock struck 8. The father decided to go pick up his daughters himself. He grabbed the keys, said he wouldn't be long. The mother stood frozen in the doorway, looking down the narrow hall, and felt her heart give a silent warning. Not a premonition or a superstition, just the body understanding, before the mind, that something was out of place. As the car moved forward, the city returned the sounds of a Sunday evening. Churches ending their services, the scattered pop of fireworks from some game, loud conversations on the sidewalk. The avenue leading to the stadium was still busy with people coming and going, laughing, sweating, just wanting to get home. He parked farther away than he would have liked, took a deep breath and walked in, searching the crowd for two identical black t-shirts. The music played on, indifferent. The father walked through the corridor of fences like a man moving through a dream with his eyes wide open. The music seemed louder than it should be, the bass vibrating in his chest, and the glare of the floodlights washed everything out. To a tired security guard, he showed the photo he'd had on his phone since lunch. The two of them in their black shirts, the same smile. The man looked, scratched his short beard, and gestured vaguely at the sea of people. It was no help. The father circled the food tents, calling their names, hearing replies that were not answers. He saw girls with similar hair, mistaking one, then two, then three. Each time he thought it was them, it wasn't. At the exit gate, he asked a water vendor who had been there all day. The young man remembered the KISS shirts. "Lots of people with band shirts," he said. "But two the same, that stands out. I think they passed by here earlier," he added without conviction. The father pressed for details, time, direction, if they were with anyone. The boy shrugged. The ice in his cooler had already turned to water. A barbecue vendor confirmed yes, he had seen two identical girls, but he couldn't remember if it was on their way in or on their way out, or if his memory had simply spliced different people into a single image. As the answers grew vague, a quiet frustration turned to desperation. The body understands first. He tried calling again, and the call went into a hollow void that wasn't off or busy. It was that silent limbo where no one answers because the phone doesn't even ring. Back home, their mother paced the cool kitchen floor as if her steps could carve a path for her daughters to return. The clock ticked loudly. She called one of the girl's classmates, the one who had taken the picture. The friend answered, frightened. She sent the photo again. She swore they were fine when she said goodbye. The next-door neighbor appeared with a glass of water and a prayer that had no place there. She was dismissed with kindness and haste. The television was left on, muted, showing an old game, its blue light flickering on the woman's face. When her husband called, his voice was clipped. Not yet. She said she was coming to the stadium too. He told her not to wait, that someone needed to stay at home. She obeyed reluctantly and pressed her forehead against the window pane, which was cold from the night air. At 8:32 p.m., the parking lot began to empty. The ground revealed what the party had hidden: trampled mud, crushed cups, wet flyers, a lost sandal. The father walked to the smaller stage area, which was already being hastily dismantled. He asked again. The men coiling cables and stretching tarps had never seen those two, or perhaps they had and just didn't remember. In the end, a city dissolves faces until everything becomes a mosaic of strangers. He looked at every corner as if memorizing a map, noting the places he would return to the next morning. The corridor of fences, the sponsor's tent, the shipping container used for storage. Before leaving, he stood on the curb, closed his eyes for a second, and listened to the emptiness that remained after the speakers went silent. Fortaleza at this hour has a deceptive kind of noise. The city looks safer than it is. In the dead of night, the father drove back across town. The mother had dropped all pretense of calm. They called an aunt, a childhood friend, a teacher who lived near the arena. No one knew anything. At 3 in the morning, they sat in silence on the sofa, neither daring to voice what the silence already screamed. At 6, when the sky lightened to a milky blue, they got up and went to file a missing persons report. The building smelled of stale coffee and old paper. They told the whole story more than once. They emphasized the description of the patched denim backpack, of the matching black t-shirts with Gene Simmons's face on them. They were told the girls might have run away together, a hypothesis that stung as much as it offended. They didn't take anything, not even their IDs, the mother repeated. They scribbled down phone numbers, gave addresses, and returned home empty-handed. Friends from school arrived with posters printed at a local internet cafe. They plastered them on lampposts, at bus stops, on the entrances to small markets. In the neighborhood, the case became the talk of the town, at bar tables, in the butcher's line, on sidewalks at dusk. One neighbor swore she'd seen 2 girls in black clothes at the wrong bus stop. Another said they had spoken to a rideshare driver before leaving, a detail that didn't hold up. A friend's cousin organized a search of the vacant lots surrounding the stadium. They waded into areas of high grass, mud clinging to their sneakers, the scent of damp earth rising from the ground each time a hose sliced through a root. They scoured the canal along the avenue. They knocked on the doors of simple houses asking permission to look in backyards. All of it was done with respect, with urgency, and without results. By the end of the first day, the twins' house no longer felt the same. Their bedroom was left untouched. No one had the courage to disturb it. The shelf of rock CDs looked like an altar without a candle. The band t-shirts folded in the closet, smelling of soap and iron, waited for bodies that never came. The mother lay on her daughter's bed and stared at the water stains on the ceiling, trying to recall anything that might have been a sign. The father sat at the table, running calculations that had nothing to do with money. How many minutes from the stadium to the bus stop? How many people used that same exit? How many cameras might have filmed the route? And then he remembered. That side parking lot was a blind spot, a void with no electronic eye, as if the city itself had chosen where not to look. The following night, the news began to circulate on local programs. Photos of the girls were displayed between traffic reports and the weather forecast. The host asked anyone with information to call the family. A truck driver messaged, saying he'd given a ride to two girls in black t-shirts on the highway. The license plate he provided didn't exist. Someone else claimed to have heard screams behind a warehouse, but a group went to the location and found only old wires, scraps of wood, and the smell of oil. Every lead felt like opening a door that led nowhere. Still, the family pushed on because a family doesn't have the luxury of giving up. As the days stretched on, the story was told and retold. The denim backpack became a character in its own right. In every interview, the mother described the rusted zipper, the crooked patches, a safety pin fastened near the front pocket. "If anyone sees it, it's theirs!" The object, once mundane, now carried the weight of evidence. People sent messages claiming to have found similar backpacks at flea markets. None were the one. The neighborhood learned to recognize the face of Gene Simmons as if he were a relative. The iconic tongue-out face printed on the girls' chests became a symbol of the search. A t-shirt vendor downtown said he would stop selling that model out of respect. He didn't, but the sentiment remained. By the turn of the second week, hope had lost its innocence. It remained, but it was heavier now, denser. The father began to trace the same route every day along Avenida Deputado Paulino Rocha, scanning the entrances to empty lots, the gates of businesses, the cracks in walls. It was a street choked with heavy traffic, with pockets of overgrown brush, construction debris, and dark recesses. Just two poorly lit blocks were enough for the world to change its tone. The realization was painful. At the same time, it seemed impossible that two young women could have walked into such a void without anyone noticing. What could have broken the path between the stage and the bus? A wrong ride? A deceptive lure? An invitation that sounded safe because it came from someone in a uniform with a badge or a convincing smile? The questions piled up, and the more time passed, the more the city learned to live with them. On the third Sunday, 12 days later, there were still freshly pasted posters with the twins' face not yet yellowed by the sun. The festival was just a memory. The stages were dismantled, the grounds washed clean by the first rain, which now drummed on the tin roof of a corner warehouse. The water washed away the dust and heat, but not the doubt. The father and mother, holding hands, watched the street turn glassy with rain and understood in a way one never chooses that their new life would be one of searching. The city, which feels small when everything is in its place, had become far too large. The first few months were a minefield of rumors. A taxi driver claimed to have taken two similar-looking girls to the main bus terminal. They checked. There was no record. A young man from the next neighborhood swore they'd been seen at a smaller concert venue on the beach. It was another pair of girls, other lives, other black shirts. The family learned to distinguish between a lead and an illusion. Even so, they answered every call, followed every tip, and always returned with the same silence in the back of the car. In the girls' room, the mother began to jot down dates on the inside cover of a notebook. Who called, where they went, who they spoke to. It was a map of attempts that, while it didn't solve anything, kept time from erasing the path they had walked. At school, the twins' shared desk remained empty for weeks. Classmates would leave messages on the blackboard, writing their names in blue marker and circling them with a heart. The principal called the family to offer support and ask about report cards that would never come. Among the teachers, some didn't know what to say. Instead of condolences, they offered math assignments. Routine is a form of resistance, they said. To the mother, it felt like an invisible offense. The father, for his part, stopped going into bakeries if the radio was on. Every guitar riff was a gut punch of memory. He preferred to walk amid the roar of bus engines where the notes couldn't reach him. A group of volunteers formed, organized by a neighbor who had helped with other searches in the past. They divided the territory into zones, drawn with a highlighter on a printed map. The midday heat beat down on the crooked palm tree on the corner and dust kicked up from the hurried feet of the searchers. They combed the area around the arena, followed gravel paths to the edge of the woods, and ventured down a dirt road where the wind cut at their face and made their eyes sting. An old man pointed them to an old well behind a supply depot. They tossed a stone in and listened for the splash, smelling the cold air that rises from deep holes. There was nothing but liquid emptiness. Elsewhere, they found the remains of a bonfire, bottles, and condoms. The father gathered it all into a pile and covered it with dirt, wanting to spare his wife the sight. The denim backpack became a practical ghost. Any backpack on the ground at a market could be the backpack. Someone found one, torn, with a rusted zipper, in a field near a local soccer pitch. The family rushed over. It was too blue, too new, too small. From a distance, it had looked right. Up close, it was wrong. Frustration became their method. Photograph, compare, measure. The father memorized the marks on the fabric, a crooked stitch near the strap, a dark stain on the bottom. The mother started wearing a t-shirt with her daughters' faces and a drawing of the backpack next to them, as if asking the city to memorize the object as well. In their own neighborhood, everyone knew. The plea was for outsiders, for anyone who might stumble upon it somewhere and make the call. Time turned to stone. At the turn of every month, the family went to the police station to update the file, bring a new photo, and insist that there had been no fight, no secret boyfriend, no plausible reason for a planned escape. They often received the same advice: wait for someone to talk, for an anonymous tip to land in the right hands, for a forgotten security camera on an old hard drive to yield a useful image. The father held back his words to keep from exploding. The mother cried silently on the way home, the open car window carrying the distant smell of the sea that reaches even the city's beachless streets. As the case went cold, they began to frequent online groups for families of the missing. There they learned a new discipline for their search. Dates, locations, clothes, habits, everything was noted with precision. The post about the twins traveled across the country, receiving messages from other states. Little of it was useful, but the support was immense. A woman from rural Tiara wrote to them about being separated from her own twin sister for years. Her letter was half advice, half embrace. The mother replied with gratitude and kept it in an envelope with school records, clippings, and receipts from their endless trips. The father, quiet as ever, kept a keychain in his pocket with the word forte, strong, which he had received at one of the support meetings. He would squeeze it whenever the anger rose. On the twins' 18th birthday, the family lit 2 candles on a simple cake bought from the corner bakery. The smell of frosting and sponge cake filled the house. They sang softly, ashamed of their own voices, as if they might wake the girls. The father cut the first slice and left it on 2 small plates that no one touched. The mother propped up their photos in a single frame and spoke to them as if they were just late for school. Finally, they blew out the candles in a single breath, their fingers slightly sticky with sugar. Outside, the neighborhood carried on. A sound car announced a sale on chicken. A child zigzagged by on a bicycle. A cloud promised rain but delivered only wind. The following years were a narrow stretch of dirt road. Each new rumor created the illusion of a horizon, but the road always closed in again. The father had to accept odd jobs. He couldn't maintain a steady work routine. The mother began to sew for others, her needle and thread, a way to keep her hands from being empty. At home, the bedroom remained untouched, but dust did what it does in uninhabited spaces. It settled on the stereo, on the CD cases, on the cloth doll that sat at the head of the bed. Every so often, the mother would wipe everything down with a damp cloth, spray a little cologne, and fluff the pillows as if preparing for an arrival. Hope changed its texture. It grew quieter, less conspicuous. By the turn of the decade, some of the photos had yellowed. The letters on the posters had faded from the walls. Still, if the father passed someone on the bus wearing a KISS t-shirt, he felt a jolt as if the past could be grabbed by the arm. At soccer matches in the stadium, he avoided parking on the side where it all began. Avenida Paulino Rocha remained essentially the same. Heavy traffic, fine dust, shops that open early, and vacant lots that change owners but remain vacant. The neighborhood learned to live with the absence as if it were a moss-covered stone in the yard. You can't easily remove it, so you learn to walk around it. By 2023, almost no one remembered the case without looking it up. The mother, however, never stopped speaking of her daughters in the present tense. Letícia likes her coffee strong. Lorena prefers it with milk. Sometimes this grammar confused people. For her, it was a personal rule of survival. The father, a man of fewer words and more walking, continued to trace the same route, a kind of pilgrimage without a saint where every corner answered no to the question in his eyes. And so it was, in the rhythm of a daily life that had already accepted it might never know, that the next year began. The morning of March 7th, 2024 should have been an ordinary one. A new construction project had doubled the traffic on the avenue, with dump trucks kicking up dust and the air smelling of diesel and damp earth from a water truck. 2 kilometers in a straight line separated this construction site from the parking lot where the twins were last seen. The city, which had never connected the two, was about to discover that sometimes the abyss between one place and another is only as high as a low wall. That morning carried the continuous roar of heavy machinery, the rumble of an excavator, a dump truck unloading earth, the crunch of gravel under tires. On Avenida Deputado Paulino Rocha, the newly marked-off construction site was rising in sections, with a wooden shed roofed in tin and the smell of reheated coffee. Gilmar Souza, 42, in worn pants and scuffed boots, started his shift with a hoe in his hands. The machine operator had stopped suddenly, saying the bucket had hit something hard. They called Gilmar over to dig by hand, because some secrets can only be reached by a shovel. The earth was heavy, dark, damp beneath the dust. Each strike of the shovel brought up fine roots and shards of brick. He pushed aside a larger clod and saw a piece of black fabric stuck to the clay. At first it looked like a discarded rag. Gilmar pulled at it with 2 fingertips, gently, afraid it would tear. The design emerged like a face rising from deep water. White, black, a faded red. It took him a few seconds to understand. Gene Simmons, tongue out, was right there, staring up from beneath his dirt-caked fingernails. A chill ran down Gilmar's spine. The memory was instantaneous. He had lived not far from here back in 2010. He vaguely recalled the talk about the missing twin girls. "Get an engineer. Stop everything," he said, his voice hoarse with dust. The noise of the construction site ceased, and the silence that followed was unnaturally heavy, as if the entire avenue were holding its breath. A circle formed around the open pit. A colleague lit the scene with his phone's flashlight. Another gently prodded the earth with the handle of a shovel, respecting the grim suspicion. The surface glistened with clay and sweat. Beside the t-shirt, a long bone came into view, dirty but unmistakable. Gilmar took a step back, his stomach churning. The site engineer came down from the foreman's shack, tied her hair back with an elastic band, and stated the obvious. "Tape it off. Nobody touches anything. Make the call." The order was hardly necessary. When the earth speaks like this, even haste learns to be still. While they waited, the crew improvised a patch of shade with a tarp. The Fortaleza sun was already high, and the dust clung to their skin like flour. Gilmar, crouching, stared without seeing, his hands trembling with a rhythm he tried to hide. He saw it wasn't just a t-shirt. A few inches away, a mass of faded blue fabric timidly appeared. Worn stitching, a piece of a zipper coated in rust. The old backpack, he thought, but said nothing. It was a silent, heavy blow. The neighborhood's past, stored away like a distant recollection, landed squarely in the pit. By the time the forensic team arrived, the construction site had become an island. The avenue continued its flow, but within that space, time had shifted. The engineer explained the discovery. The workers stepped back. A plastic tape, rustling in the wind, marked the small territory of respect. The excavation now proceeded with trowels, brushes, and hands that avoided pressure. The first contours of a skull appeared. Then the other, side by side, the black t-shirts still molded to their torsos as if time had decided to preserve the one thing that could immediately say who they were. The earth had kept everything, but without care. Moth holes, hardened folds, mud stitched into the fibers. Between them, lying on its side, was the denim backpack. The zipper was crooked, the front pocket almost intact. Gilmar couldn't look away. On impulse, he turned his head, gazing at the tin-roofed shack. He could almost hear the sound of an old rain drumming on it, a memory from the year they built a nearby warehouse and the water made music on the roof. It wasn't raining now, but the sound seemed trapped in the air, as if his memory had laid a soundtrack over the scene. He thought of a neighbor's daughters from Messejana, almost the same age back in 2010. He thought of the kitchen radio, of the news reports that had repeated their photos for weeks. What was there to say? Nothing. He took off his cap, wiped his eyes, and leaned against a wall, keeping the weight of being the first to see to himself. The news traveled through the neighborhood faster than a loaded truck. A motorcycle taxi driver stopped, looked from a distance, and drove away. In a message group, someone wrote, "They found something big on Paulino Rocha Avenue." On the way, the twins' mother replied with an emoji that has no place here. The father didn't need a message. The same road he had traveled for 14 years returned to him that morning, a feeling that was neither hope nor panic. It was the certainty that some kind of answer had finally surfaced. He parked 2 blocks away and walked with steps that tried not to stumble. They didn't let him get close, which was a mercy. The engineer spoke to him in a corner, her voice low, her words measured. The man nodded, more for the others than for himself. The recovery of the remains took hours. Each shovelful of earth was a careful gesture. Each root, an obstacle to be overcome with delicacy. The KISS t-shirts, nearly dissolved, still bore parts of the logo. One, though, was whole enough to show the faded red tongue. On the side of the pit, a paper wristband stuck to the mud disintegrated at a touch. Its message lost forever. The backpack, when finally lifted, dripped in old water that smelled of everything that has been too long without sun. The zipper groaned, more from stubbornness than mechanics. Inside there was no wallet, no notebook, no phone, only a handful of sand that trickled from the corners. Late in the afternoon, the sky took on that shade of blue that only appears when the heat has tired itself out. The site had a different feel. The plastic tape trembled in the breeze from the avenue. The trucks now passed more slowly, as if their engines could show respect. A colleague handed Gilmar a cold water, and someone's hand touched his shoulder. A quick, wordless gesture. He thought about not coming back the next day, but he knew he would. It's hard to abandon the place where a story turns. As they packed up the tools, a stray dog appeared, sniffed at the disturbed earth, and moved on. Life around them was resuming its rhythm, but everyone who had been there knew a fold had been made in the fabric of the city. In the shack, they noted what needed to be noted, collected what needed to be collected. The girl's father sat on a step, his body bent forward, elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. He did not cry there. The mother, who had stayed home at his insistence, paced back and forth in their yard. The clay marked her sandals, the phone in her hand, as if she were holding a lifeline. When he called, his words came out broken. At a plastic table, someone tried to explain how you can dig for one answer and find another, how you can expect a path and be met with an end. No one offered an opinion. Anyone who lives near an empty lot knows the earth holds too much. The next morning, local papers reported the discovery of two skeletons side by side, dark t-shirts still clinging to their torsos. No names were released. There was no way to be sure yet. The city woke with the rumor clinging to its morning coffee. The girl's mother pressed her forehead against the window pane again and finally allowed a part of herself to crumble. There was a cruel kind of relief in it, the relief of no longer searching the entire world. The father looked down the hallway where his daughters used to drop their backpacks after school and understood, in a fleeting instant, that the old denim backpack was now in a brown paper bag in some cold place waiting for comparison. The sun rose, the zinc roofs popped in the heat, and the city moved on. But for those inside the story, nothing was the same. The day after the discovery, the city awoke to still air and a sun that burned before 8. In the wooden shack, the smell of reheated coffee mixed with the scent of damp earth that still clung to the boots. The backhoe sat idle, defeated by a square of plastic tape that, for all its lightness, seemed more powerful than any machine. Gilmar arrived earlier than he needed to. He put his hands in his pockets, looked at the hole covered by a tarp, and felt that chill on his back again. The engineer thanked him for his care the day before. She said the work would continue on another front, that this ground needed to be left in peace for a while. He nodded, as if someone had asked permission to enter his own memory. Meanwhile, in Messejana, the mother opened the gate slowly, as if afraid the noise would wake a house that still needed to sleep. In the laundry sink, a forgotten t-shirt of one of her daughters smelled of soap and thyme. She put water on to boil and waited for the phone call they had promised would come as soon as possible. She couldn't name what she was feeling, if it was grief or relief or the kind of vertigo you get when the road ends but your body keeps moving forward. The father didn't hesitate. He put his wallet in his pocket, took a deep breath, and walked down the steps. The hallway was lit by a white glare that seemed harsher that day. At the Forensic Institute, the air conditioning turned the hallway into a place with no neighborhood, no street, no sun. The receptionist asked for their documents, offered a chair, water, a tissue. The father signed papers with handwriting he didn't recognize as his own. A kind technician explained she would take a swab from the inside of his cheek for genetic comparison. The mother heard the words cheek and comparison and nothing else. She sat, opened her mouth when asked, and tried to remain steady. The cotton swab scraped the skin inside, and the simple gesture felt like a crossing. The father repeated the motion, his hand steady, the hand of a man doing what must be done. The technician thanked them, explaining that the material would go to a lab that worked with old bones, a routine the country knows better than it would like. They listened. They nodded. They stored each word as if memorizing an address. Before leaving, they passed a hallway that looked into a glass-walled room. For a second, the father saw it. On a metal table, the denim backpack in a transparent bag swollen with dry earth. The crooked zipper looked like a weary smile. Beside it, another plastic bag held what was left of the t-shirts, pieces with the logo still visible, holes that the mud had widened, loose threads that looked like roots. There was nothing else. The glass prevented him from seeing details, and for that, he was grateful. They walked on, their steps slow, as if the floor itself demanded silence. The days that followed were an invisible cue. In the mornings, the father walked the same route as always, as if walking could pull time forward. In the afternoons, the mother embroidered a simple design on the hem of a towel, blue thread moving in and out of the fabric, an attempt at order. At night, the girl's room filled with shadow and the door closed on its own, untouched. The phone slept on the arm of the sofa. Friends stopped by, bringing chicken broth, leaving hugs that didn't squeeze too tightly. In the neighborhood, some asked questions that seemed innocent but stung. Others averted their eyes, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Life, which in Fortaleza is loud, had lowered its volume around that house. The press in the first few days tried to guess. Some spoke of an accident. Some recalled that the lot back in 2010 had low walls and side entrances where any car could have passed unnoticed. One commentator said the absence of valuables other than the backpack could point to a robbery. Another, more careful, said only that time erases traces. In the end, no one knew. And the Institute said nothing. The skeletons showed no clear signs of trauma, and the earth, generous in its concealment, had not kept any easy clues. With every new theory that emerged, the mother turned off the TV not out of anger but exhaustion. The father let the hum of the fan fill the living room, a familiar noise that, for a few minutes, pushed the rumors away. At the construction site, Gilmar earned the reputation of the one who found it. He didn't like it. He began to answer in half words, to drink more water, to pull his cap down until his face was in shadow. A colleague asked if he'd had nightmares. He said no, and it was true. He didn't dream. The image would just appear in the middle of the day, out of nowhere, like a sound you hear and then search for its source. At home, he spoke little of it, not because he was callous, but because it felt wrong to mix that discovery with dinner. On the site, the tarp over the hole trembled in the wind, sometimes releasing a fine dust that stuck to the skin. No one touched it. No one took pictures. They had learned a code of respect the hard way. On the 10th day, the phone rang in the morning, when the light was still slanting through the living room window. The voice on the other end was professional but not cold. It confirmed what the neighborhood already supposed. The genetic profiles were a match. "It's them." The words filled the entire house as if every wall had heard them. The mother placed a hand on the back of a chair to steady herself. The father felt something in his chest come undone, and he couldn't tell if it was a knot or a chain. The person on the phone carefully explained that the cause of death was undetermined. They said that the state of decomposition after so many years underground left few answers. They promised to release the remains for a farewell once the paperwork was complete. They whispered their thanks, barely audible. Outside, the March heat lingered on the sidewalk tiles. The father walked to the corner, leaned against a post, and looked down the avenue, which at that moment seemed longer than before. A bus passed, spewing smoke. An ice cream vendor pushed his cart, the ice inside rattling like a soft bell. He walked back home and hugged his wife in the narrow hallway. And the two of them stood there for an indefinite time, the light on for no reason. A neighbor rang the doorbell, offering help with whatever was to come. They asked for little: a borrowed car, a bottle of water, silence. At the Institute, they prepared the release. The t-shirts and the backpack could not be returned. They had become part of the file, stored away as pieces of a puzzle that might never be fully assembled. What came back were remains wrapped in white cloth with a number in the corner that would be entered into the official record. The father chose a simple coffin of light, unadorned wood, like everything they had always preferred. The mother asked that beneath the shroud, they placed 2 cuttings of black fabric on which she had embroidered the KISS logo the night before, a gesture that spoke only to those who love. It was not a tribute to the band, but a memento of the day that would forever be defined as such. The wake was held at the neighborhood cemetery beside a low, lichen-covered wall. The sky threatened rain but never delivered, leaving the air heavier than before. People arrived in small groups, many in silence, others speaking in hushed tones. Some wore the t-shirts the girls had loved. A former classmate, now an adult, recognized from a distance the embroidered backpack the mother held in her lap. Not the real one. It was impossible for it to be there, but one she had sewn onto a cushion. as if to restore form to what had been taken. There was the smell of flowers and dust and the song of a bird that insisted on piercing the grief. The father acknowledged each embrace with a look that sought no words. The mother caressed the fabric of the coffin as though sending 14 years of affection through it. In the late afternoon, the light turned golden and the surrounding zinc roofs popped in the heat. The gravedigger worked with respect and precision, and the sound of his shovel striking the earth was a rhythm no one wanted to follow, but they did. The burial was brief and without eulogies. Those who needed to speak spoke inwardly. Those who had nothing to say held someone's hand. When it was all over, the mother took from her pocket a piece of paper with a drawing of the backpack the sisters used to share at school and left it at the foot of the headstone, weighing it down with a sun rock. The father looked up at the sky, searching for nothing, and then at the dirt road that cut through the cemetery, where the wind stirred up eddies of fine dust that clung to the skin. That night they returned home, weary in body and mind. The bedroom door remained closed. In the kitchen, the sound of the kettle filling with water seemed far too loud. They sat at the table and for the first time spoke of what came next. Not as a plan, but as an act of care. The mother suggested turning the room into a space for remembrance, one that wouldn't hurt. The father said that before that he wanted to give a hug to Gilmar, the man who had unwittingly been the bridge between the disappearance and the discovery. They agreed. It wouldn't solve anything, but sometimes the world shifts a centimeter with such gestures. The next morning they went to the construction site. Gilmar was sitting on a wooden crate, his hands stained with earth, his gaze fixed on the short horizon of a man who works with the ground. The father thanked him without a speech, and the worker replied with a heartfelt, "I'm sorry." They spoke of the heat, the dust, of the work that would soon resume. Then they parted ways. The avenue continued to push cars along. The corner bar rolled up its steel door. The wind swept across the adjacent dirt road, carrying dry leaves. Life resumed its march, but now there was a fixed point to return to with flowers and slants. And still, the question that would not fade remained. How did the two of them go from the light of the stage to a hole in the ground so close by? After the burial, the question returned to the center of things. Like a stone placed upon a table, what was the path between the stage and the grave? The father began with the path he could walk with his eyes closed. He went back to the side parking lot, where the festival had set up its smaller stage. He stared at the ghost of the fences that were no longer there, only the memory of their outline, and he retraced, step by step, the zigzag stage of 2010. He pictured the two of them in the middle of the crush of the crowd. He mentally counted the paces from the sponsor's tent to the exit. How many seconds are lost when someone drops a cup and you instinctively bend down? The concrete still held the invisible faded tracks of sound equipment cases. He leaned against a pillar and waited for the city's noise to fill the void the music had left. At the gate of a nearby warehouse, he found an older man who said he had worked as a security guard in 2010. The man recalled makeshift uniforms, the title production assistant on laminated paper badges, unmarked cars arriving to unload ice, boxes, provisions for the festival's hunger. There was a service entrance that led to the back avenue, he said, pointing. People who weren't with the show would pass through there without drawing much notice. The father asked about times, about the flow of people, about the late afternoon when the girls were supposed to have left. The guard squinted, stumbling through his memory, offering more impressions than facts. Still, he left a sliver of a hypothesis hanging in the air. Someone with a vest and a convincing voice can open a path where common sense closes one. The father continued toward Avenida Deputado Paulino Rocha. The asphalt in this section stretched out in long, straight lines, flanked by pockets of sparse scrubland. remnants of old walls and lots that had once been something, then something else, and were now nothing again. Back then, the lot where the bones were dug up had a low wall, a rusted gate, and a gap wide enough for a small car. Next to it stood a warehouse with a zinc roof that popped when it got hot. He touched the metal, new now, remembering with anger the ease with which a poorly secured opening invites misfortune. At the corner bar, a man in a cap swore that dogs had barked wildly that night. The kind of frantic barking they do when a scent is not what it should be. But dogs bark at everything, the man added, diminishing his own certainty. In a house set back from the road lived Donna Zulaida, who hadn't moved since before 2010. She received the father on her porch, a desk fan blowing hot air, the smell of reheated coffee in the air. She recalled that on the Sunday of the festival, the street was crowded in the early evening with lost people looking for a bus stop, cars parking where they shouldn't. Later, when the noise of the crowd had died down, a small car drove by slowly, its headlights dim. It stopped for a minute in front of the vacant lot, drove away, then came back. It might be something I invented later, she corrected herself. Our memories mix what we saw with what we learned afterward. He didn't press her, thanking her as one would for a glass of water. With the map of the neighborhood in his head, he tried to stitch together a plausible thread. There was no way two young women would cross a dark avenue on their own to an open lot unless something had pushed them there. The backpack found between the skeletons said they hadn't let go of what was theirs. The identical t-shirt said they were together until the end. The absence of obvious debris of any foreign object said that the earth, so generous in swallowing names, had not concerned itself with explanations. The doubt sharpened. A deceptive invitation? A ride offered with some symbol of authority? A shortcut that seemed safe because it came from someone who appeared to be in control of the place? The questions weren't new, but now they had coordinates. He began to walk the same route at the time his daughters would have left the festival. Between 6 and 7 p.m., the light in Fortaleza is treacherous. It is still bright, but the shadows are already stretching everything. In that interval, Avenida Paulino Rocha feels like a borderland. Trucks hurrying home, crowded buses, a dry wind that sweeps the roadsides, kicking up fine dust that sticks to your sweat. In the space of 2 blocks, the city changes its language. From joyful noise to hushed conversation, from crowd to emptiness, from stage lights to the darkness of a vacant lot. He stopped at a corner and closed his eyes. He imagined a car pulling over, a window rolling down, a voice calling a name. Was their name on the school ID attached to the backpack? It wasn't. He imagined a request for help, a quick, just a second, the automatic impulse to be kind. He opened his eyes again, irritated with his own imagination. The depth at which they were found suggested, according to those who understand the earth, that the grave had been dug in a continuous, rapid effort. The soil there is a dark clay that clings to a shovel and doubles in weight when soaked. In 2010, July was not a month of heavy rain, which would have made digging easier without turning the ground to mud. With a low wall and little light, a single night would have been enough to hide 2 entire stories. The creak of a gate could be mistaken for any gate. The muffled sound of a shovel striking dirt would not bring a neighbor to look over the wall. This realization brought no comfort. It only made clearer the banality with which one crosses a line of no return. The father went back to the stadium one last time in that cycle. He stood where the smaller stage had been, took a deep breath, and for the first time allowed himself to picture a scene impossible to prove. Letícia trying to call at 5:48 p.m., the call not connecting. Lorena saying, "We'll talk to them when we leave." The 2 of them walking in the wrong direction because of the flow of the crowd. A man opening a side gate, a service path that offers a shortcut and separation. The two of them asking, "Is this the way?" And that was it. There was nothing to disprove it and nothing to confirm it. It was just a hypothesis stitched together from loose threads. He preferred not to say it out loud. He carried it in his pocket like a piece of paper with tiny letters, meant to be read alone. At home, the mother began to work on the bedroom again. She dusted the shelves. She wiped them with a damp cloth. She organized the CD collection by band. Kiss went in the front. Not because she liked it more, but because it was inevitable. She folded 2 black t-shirts and placed them on a chair. She arranged the worn-out sneakers under the bed, as if they were drying from a recent rainstorm. On the wall, she hung the last photo from the festival, the one taken in front of the smaller stage, and next to it, a small copy of the neighborhood map with a line drawn in pen from their house. To Avenida Paulino Rocha. It was not a shrine. It was a method of continuing the conversation with them. In a low voice, she would ask that wherever they were, a word that now meant something else entirely, they receive her visits when she came to bring flowers. Gilmar, far from this domestic ritual, continued his work on the site. He relearned how to walk past the tarpaulin without looking at the memory. Sometimes when the jackhammer stopped and the silence fell heavy, he would hear the clink of a tool in a bucket and see for a fleeting moment the t-shirt print emerging from the ground. Just like the first time. He would plant his feet more firmly to return to the present. A colleague remarked at the end of a shift, "It's like that lot held not just the bones but a piece of the neighborhood's history. Now that it's been disturbed, we'll have to build twice, once on the ground and once inside ourselves." No one replied. That was it, and it was the most that could be said. Over time, a silent agreement settled over those who carried this story. The urgency to find a perfect explanation had faded because one never came. What remained was a narrative that could be told with honesty. 2 young women went to a concert, left happy, tried to call home, and at some short point on the map they disappeared. Years later, the earth returned them side by side with the backpack between them. What happened between one point and the other remains a dark corridor. And as long as that corridor exists, the father will walk its edges, the mother will keep the bedroom tidy and light, and Gilmar, from time to time, will set his shovel down more gently, remembering that some things must be moved slowly. The father decided to start again from the most banal beginning. The bus. In 2010, the girls would have taken the line that cuts through Messejana, crosses Padre Pedro de Alencar, and drops people off near the stadium. He got on the bus at the same time, held on to the cold metal rail, and watched the stops go by with the eyes of someone searching for footprints on asphalt. The smell of diesel and sweat mixed with the sweet perfume of someone in the seat in front of him. Through the window, the city passed like a videotape. Mechanic shops with dark grease stains on the sidewalks. Small markets with crates of fruit stacked high. A house with a broken roof tile propped up by a brick. He mentally counted how many minutes each stretch consumed. He thought of his daughters standing, leaning their shoulders against each other, laughing at a meme that no longer even exists. When he got off, the heat hit him like a soft punch, the kind that doesn't leave a bruise but aches all the same. Around the stadium, the landscape had changed without changing its essence. The side parking lot now hosted trucks for smaller events, but the layout of the ground was the same. A young man selling coconut water said he'd started working there as a boy, helping an uncle right around 2010. "So many people, sir, day and night, lots of colorful wristbands, lots of black shirts." He remembered the cover band that played before sunset. He remembered the sun hitting the metal structures just so. He remembered a girl with a kiss print on her shirt, who raised her arm looking for a cell signal and laughed at her own gesture. If it was one of them, I don't know. We hold on to pieces and then stitch them together later." The father thanked him, wanting to hold the pieces without assembling anything. A former roadie who had worked that season agreed to talk in the shade of a wall. He pointed out where the service entrance had been, a makeshift gate of movable fencing and a chain. Boxes, ice cables, people with vests passed through there. The control was more by sight than by paperwork, he admitted. His face a little ashamed, he said that some of the support vehicles would take a shortcut around the back to avoid the crowds. It was easy to follow someone with a badge, thinking it was a faster way. The father listened in silence. He didn't want to accuse or absolve anyone. He just wanted to understand the logic of a space where haste is king. In the image he held, two hurried teenagers could easily trust someone who opens a gate and says, "This way is faster." In the afternoon, he returned to Avenida Deputado Paulino Rocha. The asphalt trembled under the weight of trucks. He walked to the front of the lot where, 14 years later, the earth had opened up. The construction had resumed on a different spot. The wind cut across the edge of the road, raising a fine dust that clung to his sweaty arm. Across from him, a tin-roofed shed crackled under the sun. He leaned against the gate, closed his eyes, and pictured the old one. It was low, a slack chain, a creak that could be mistaken for any other. The thought of how it all could have been so easy to do and so impossible to undo ached like an inflamed tooth. Donna Zulaida, on her porch, offered him a glass of water and a place in the shade. She recounted again the story of the small car that came and went that night. Low headlights, a hesitant crawl, like someone looking for a place to pull over without drawing attention. Then she corrected herself. It could have been another day, another party. Memory is a fabric that stretches with time. The father didn't want to nail anything down. He had learned over the years that memories absorb so much of what they are told. Still, it was impossible not to try and fit those low headlights onto a stretch of road in his mind. He thanked her and walked on, carrying the doubt like a smooth stone in his pocket. Back in Messejana, he entered a handbag repair shop. The seamstress, her hands steady from a lifetime of holding fabric, remembered the girls. They used to bring in their backpack to have the strap reinforced now and then, she said, opening a drawer full of scraps. She rummaged through pieces of denim, looking for a shade similar to the one they used years ago. It was a blue that leaned toward gray, faded, hard to find. Her voice grew quieter when she spoke of the zipper he already knew about, the one found twisted in a way it shouldn't have been. "I told them it was going to jam for good one of these days," she said. "They just laughed, said they'd figure it out." The object once again took on a solid form. In the father's mind, the backpack became a broken compass that still pointed north. The next step was to reread old notes. The notebook, where the mother began documenting everything in 2010, had pages yellowed at the edges. Security guard said he saw no one leave. Water vendor remembers a space. Friend confirms photo from a little after 4. Call at 5:48 p.m. didn't connect. No fight, no planned trip. The father turned the pages slowly. His wife's handwriting, firm even in its anguish. Some places were marked with a star. A vacant lot behind a warehouse. The entrance to a condominium that didn't exist back then. The street where vendors set up their stalls. Their map was an honest one. It showed the paths they had taken and the dead ends they had found. That night on the sidewalk, the neighborhood did what neighborhoods do. There was talk of soccer, children playing dodgeball, the smell of pizza wafting from a small doorway. A teenager walked by wearing a generic rock band t-shirt, and the father turned his head. An old reflex. The mother, sitting in an aluminum chair, spoke of the girls' room. She had taken down the posters with their faded tape and put up picture frames. She left the window open to let the air in. "I don't want a heavy shrine," she said. "I want it to feel as if they've just stepped out and might come back any moment to talk about their day." On the shelf, their CD collection was now interspersed with small plants in recycled tin cans, an attempt at lightness in a place that had carried too much weight. The following Sunday, they went to the square where young people play guitar and attempt cover songs. A girl, the same age the twins would have been, was singing an old ballad. It wasn't Kiss, but it was from the years when the two of them would ride the bus downtown to see shows. The father thought of time as a road full of potholes. Even if you know the way, there's always a point where you have to swerve. The mother held his hand. They agreed without a word that they would try not to let the question of how become a wall they ran into every day. It would be a question that lived in the back of the house, but one that didn't dictate what was for lunch, or the clothes on the line, or the brief laugh when the soap opera became too dramatic. At the end of this circuit, he felt he had a clearer picture of what was not known. And that was not nothing. He could now distinguish what could have plausibly happened, a shortcut offered by someone with access. An approach confident enough to disarm their caution. The proximity of the lot with its low wall and poor lighting acting as a pocket in the urban fabric where things fall and disappear. This outline offered neither culprits nor relief. It did, however, offer an honest kind of rest. The certainty that the girls had done nothing that two young women who trust the world to let them come home wouldn't do. Back at the house, as she closed the windows, the mother heard a faint, fine rain begin to fall on a tin roof somewhere on the next block. Fortaleza has a habit of raining in one corner and not another. She gave a slight smile, not of joy, but of recognition at an old sound. Life sometimes calls to us with the sound of time itself. In the days that followed, the father tried to move through the past as one might flip through an old magazine at a newsstand. He returned to small shops that now had new owners. He asked about security cameras that might have once existed. He received looks that were a mixture of pity and statute of limitations. In 2010, that side parking lot was a blind spot. The electronic eyes were on the main entrances. For the rest, people relied on human eyes and common sense. One shopkeeper pulled an old hard drive from a drawer, a layer of dust covering it like a buried treasure. There were no images from that day, just shaky recordings of a late August rainstorm, a dog crossing the sidewalk, nothing useful. Time in matters like these is a hungry animal that devours proof. The phone records were what they had always been. One attempted call at 5:48 p.m., which fell into a void. No new calls, no messages left behind. The father looked at the old phone, kept in a clear box in the bedroom closet. The mother had cleaned it carefully and wrapped it in cloth, as if preparing a memory so it wouldn't cut. There was no way to revive it now without disturbing what had become part of a closed case. It remained an exhibit in their private museum, one the couple respected from a distance. The neighborhood, always a source of stories, began to trim the edges of its own memory. The person who said they heard dogs barking in 2010 now reconsidered. It could have been another night during that dry winter. The one who swore they saw two girls in black at the wrong bus stop realized they might have been mixing up stories. The father wasn't irritated. He understood that the mind is a seamstress that sometimes patches a hole with a different kind of cloth. The conversations then lost their gloss of novelty and took on the value of companionship. People would stop him just to say, "Oh, I remember them." The verb in the present tense felt right to him. The engineer from the construction site agreed to have coffee with them at a corner bar. She was old enough to have been the twins' older sister. She told them how she had led the work stoppage, how the crew learned to tread more lightly, what it was like to see the backpack between the two of them. Her eyes welled up without shame. I work with buildings, with spreadsheets, she said. That day I came to understand the ground in a different way. The mother held the young woman's hand for a second, a silent gesture of gratitude. Gilmar, the man who had made the discovery, kept to himself, grabbing a quick lunch of a mortadella sandwich and strong coffee, avoiding hearing his own story told by others. The father decided then to focus on small details, the ones that escape the big questions. He asked in thrift stores about Kiss t-shirts that might have been circulating in the neighborhood at the time, just to gauge how many people wore something similar. He discovered that in 2010, a large batch of counterfeit shirts had hit Fortaleza and spread through the street markets. Many people wore the band's logo on their chest without being fans, simply because it was cheap. This seemingly useless piece of information calmed him. If someone had said, "I saw two girls in Kiss shirts," it could have been his daughters, or it could have been any other pair. Knowing this was not a small thing. It was lifting the weight from a flimsy testimony. In the bedroom, the mother organized a box for things that never came back. She wrote a title on the outside with a blue pen, even though she knew that the list, by definition, would remain empty. It was a way of naming the absence so that it wouldn't contaminate everything else. That same week, she taped a piece of paper to the back of the door with 3 lines written on it. "Welcome those who come. Care for the room. Do not feed ghosts." The last item wasn't about mysticism, which she'd never believed in. It was about not letting the house become a stage where grief was the director. She straightened the bedspread, opened the window wide every morning, and let the wind sweep the dust away before it could settle. One Sunday afternoon, a short rain fell only on the block behind them. The sound on the neighbor's tin roof brought an involuntary memory of the construction site. The mother felt her chest tighten and took a deep breath, counting slowly to 10 as she stared at the clothesline. The father, standing outside, let the mud rise a little on his shoes, as if he wanted to feel the weight the earth has when it holds a secret for so many years. On their weekly visit to the cemetery, they brought simple flowers, water in a reused bottle, and a cloth to wipe the headstone. The groundskeeper greeted them with the familiarity born of repetition. The wind whistled down the narrow corridor between the tombs. Life, even here, was relearning the path of coming and going. In the midst of this exercise of continuing, letters began to arrive from people they didn't know. These weren't quick social media messages. They were paper letters, written in careful handwriting. A woman from rural Piauí, who had also lost a daughter in an unsolved disappearance, wrote about the pact of those who do not know. "We learned to live with 2 dinner tables," she wrote, "the one in the world and the one inside." A young man from Maranguape told them his brother had left without a note, and years later they found his bicycle leaning against a reservoir. He spoke of a relief that hurts. The father answered some, the mother others. The act of writing with a pen brought a good rhythm back to their thoughts. Gilmar, who was still working on the site, finally agreed to meet the father at the same corner bar. They sat side by side, looking out at the avenue like men watching traffic instead of facing each other. They spoke of timetables, of the depth of the grave, of the weight of the earth. They spoke of family, of a neighbor's daughter who took the university entrance exam, of the ever-rising electricity bill. They spoke of nothing, and in the middle of it, they said what was essential. "Thank you," from one side. "Forgive me if I brought you pain," from the other. They left with the feeling that each was now carrying an inch less of weight. At the end of the month, some of the workers moved on to a new tower project, and the taped-off square that had been an island on the site began to fade. The hole now covered was just ground again. The father passed by and stopped for a minute. It wasn't a vigil, just an acknowledgement. The city, indifferent, pushed its motorcycles and buses past him. and he realized that this very indifference was now his chance to go on. There is a kind of pain that demands the world stop, but after the initial shock, discovering that the world keeps going is what allows you to breathe again. On the bus ride home, he saw a girl with a new denim backpack, too blue, with no patches. The zipper gleamed. He felt his heart pull and then release. It wasn't theirs. It never would be again. And yet in her simple gesture of adjusting the strap on her shoulder, he recognized the everyday shape of a possible life. He held on to that image carefully, like someone folding a clean cloth and putting it back in a drawer. With the confirmation of identity and the silence about the cause, the neighborhood's life entered a state of organized remembrance. Someone painted two stylized faces on the wall of a basketball court. Simple lines, hair falling to their shoulders, no logos, no signature. It wasn't an official mural, just a spontaneous tribute. The drip of paint in the corner looked like a tear, but it could have just been haste. The mother passed by with a market bag and found it beautiful in a difficult way. She didn't take a picture, she held it in her gaze. At the school they had attended, the principal held a discussion circle with the younger students. She spoke of being careful at events, of arranging a ride home, of not accepting easy shortcuts. It wasn't a moralistic lecture, it wasn't the time for that. She gave the girls, who were now 17, a practical ruler to measure their safety by. Share your location. Travel in groups, be wary of rushed invitations. The twins' mother was invited. She chose not to speak at the microphone. In the courtyard, leaning against a pillar, she watched the coming and going of recess, the loud noise, the smell of cafeteria snacks and soda being opened. The sound of the teenagers comforted her. Life needed to keep on being loud. The father, for his part, attended a support group for families in another part of Fortaleza. The plastic chairs made their scraping music on the floor. There was coffee, cornbread, and eye contact. The stories were different, but the foundation was the same. A point on a map becomes the edge of an abyss. An old man from the Bom Hardim neighborhood said that what saves you is discipline, not hope. You get up, you sweep, you eat. That's it. Hope stays asleep in the corner. Sometimes it wakes up on its own. The father recognized the method. He went home with a crumpled flyer in his pocket and the phone number of a young man who helps find old newspaper archives. Gilmar unintentionally became a point of reference. An acquaintance suggested he go to schools and talk about how to stop a construction project when the earth gives back bones. He politely refused. My job is to dig and to respect. I'll leave the storytelling to those who can do it without getting lost. Even so, at the bar, he became an ear for others' explanations. People asked for details he preferred not to repeat, drawn by that mix of curiosity and fear that always surfaces. He would give the bare minimum and change the subject to soccer, or to the rain that wouldn't come. On the avenue there was talk of a small plaque once the building was finished. Nothing official. No one wanted to turn another's pain into a selling point. But it would be a discreet reminder that here one day the neighborhood had stood still. The future building manager liked the idea. The construction company was uneasy. The family offered no opinion. The mother only asked that if they did it, it should be clean and understated. Those who need to know will know, she said. The father thought about how the city is made of invisible layers, that there are things beneath buildings, asphalt, and plazas. He had walked over history his whole life without feeling it under his feet. Now he felt it. The collection of significant objects was reduced to what was already known. The t-shirts, the backpack, the bracelet that had turned to mud, but the neighborhood's collective mind needed icons to hold on to. Fabric bracelets appeared with the initials L and L, sold by a young woman at the street market. The profits went to a support group for families. The father bought two, not to wear, but to keep. The mother pinned one to the bedroom curtain on the back, where only she would see it. On the kitchen radio, a classic guitar song played. She didn't change the station. She was learning to live with the memory without turning off the sound. An old classmate of the twins showed up one day. A sparse beard, scratched glasses, the old sweat of shyness on his forehead. He brought a CD from a local band they had liked, autographed by a member who now worked as a store clerk and played in his spare time. "I thought you might like to have this." The mother thanked him. The father placed the disc near the others on the shelf without creating an altar, without hierarchy. Just one more object in the same world as before. There was also a visit from a journalist who wanted to retell the story with respect. He listened, drank strong, filtered coffee, and took few notes. He didn't force theories, didn't ask for tears. The article came out days later, with photos of the street, of the wall with their faces, of the long avenue. It spoke of the ground, of the backpack, but not of culprits. The mother read it and exhaled slowly. It's not every day the city manages to speak with the delicacy one needs. She kept the clipping in a folder, among other reports, like someone filing away a chapter of a book worth rereading. The construction of the building moved forward. Where the cordoned-off square had been, there was now a level floor. Workers moved about with wheelbarrows. When it rained, a puddle always formed in the same spot, a stubborn memory of the old terrain. Gilmar, one of the workers, would swerve around it out of habit, even when the sun had baked everything dry. At the end of a shift, he sat on a crate, took off his boots, shook out the dust, and rubbed his eyes. He thought of the first time he saw the face of Gene Simmons emerging from the mud. He thought of the day his own daughters, the ones he never had. Perhaps one day they would find old photos of this story on some social network and ask. He decided that if it ever happened, he would tell them without the torment, the way the neighborhood had told it to him, straightforward, without invention, with respect. The father adopted a small ritual on his way home from work. He would pass by the avenue, look without stopping, and continue on. It wasn't surveillance, not an addiction. It was a way of remembering that the path connecting home and absence is short, and the opposite path, the one connecting absence and home, he had traveled it so many times that the way could not be lost. The mother, for her part, made the journey from the bedroom to the kitchen with new gestures. She would take out 2 cups and then, from old reflex, put one back. And then she would laugh at herself. "An old habit," she would say without drama, "of someone who expects a full table." Time, which had lurched forward in fits and starts at the beginning, found a steady rhythm. The neighborhood, which had first whispered secrets, began to tell the story with a certain lightness. Not because the pain diminished, it is the size that it is, but because they had learned how to carry it. Some cases become corner store legends. This one became a decent memory. When someone asks, they point the way with an open hand. They explain without coldness. They add the sound of rain on the tin roof, the wind cutting across the dirt road, the mud of the lot sticking to a shoelace. These Brazilian details, our effective geography, help the mind from becoming a map made only of shadows. The months passed, and the main tower cast a new shadow on Paulino Rocha Street. The newly installed windows reflected the Fortaleza sky like pieces of a lake. And on the ground floor, gardeners lined up Ixora seedlings in flower beds still free of ants. The father stopped outside with the posture of one who is not visiting, but paying respect to the ground. The engineer came to the gate to say they had thought of discreetly placing a concrete bench under a new Quixabeira tree. No plaque, just a bench. "Whoever knows," she said, unknowingly echoing the mother's words, "will sit with a different weight." He nodded. He liked the unceremonious gesture. One afternoon, when the wind blew stronger, heavy clouds pulled rain over one part of the avenue, leaving the other dry. The water came down in buckets on the tin roof of the adjacent warehouse. A familiar music. The smell of wet earth rose and brought a peace that felt forbidden. The mother passing by with a bag of vegetables took shelter under an awning and waited for the curtain of water to thin. She watched workers run by with planks of wood. The fat drops drew lines on the sidewalk. A boy jumped over a puddle with the skill of someone born there. In the midst of the rain, she cried the way she wanted to cry. Her face washed clean with no one needing to see. The issue of the plaque came up again. The construction company, fearing the noise it would create, backed down. Future residents were divided. Some wanted to remember, others didn't want the association. The family stayed out of it. They had learned that you cannot educate another's sense of propriety. They did what they could in their own territory. At the cemetery, the girl's headstone received a small embroidered drawing of the backpack, covered with glass to protect it. That is where the story has its caption. On the avenue, the concrete bench, when it was finally installed, had a groove that cast a thin shadow in the late afternoon. A place to wait for the bus, which sometimes becomes a place to wait for time itself. During this period, the father returned to an old hypothesis and unfolded it into scenes, not to torture himself, but to understand the scope of the possible. He imagined the girls leaving through a side exit, accepting guidance from someone in a vest, turning into a service corridor and finding a door that led outside. The sound of the city suddenly changing tone. He imagined the offer of a short ride to a quieter spot, the rush to not miss the bus, the impulse to trust because the voice sounded like it belonged there. He imagined a mistake, a scare, an accident where panic turns into a hasty choice, to hide, to bury, to erase the tracks. The lot 2 kilometers away, with its low wall and no attentive neighbors, fit. It didn't need a movie script to make sense, just the ordinary sum of carelessness, opportunity, and someone else's fear. The mother, on the other hand, preferred not to stage scenarios. She gathered her courage and went for the first time since the funeral, to the side parking lot of the Castelão stadium. She didn't go in, just stopped on the street and looked over the wall. The peeling concrete revealed layers of old paint. She closed her eyes and saw her daughters with paper wristbands, sunglasses, laughing with all their teeth showing. She opened her eyes again, breathed, and purposefully saved the image, a mental photograph for when the night grew tight. Her body had learned a trick, to swap the memory of the whole for this sunny scene whenever her mind tried to be cruel. It's not escape, it's mental hygiene. In the neighborhood, Sundays returned to their normal noise. The sound car passed slowly, advertising a sale on chicken. A child learned to ride a bike without training wheels on the cracked sidewalk. The cry of the pamonha vendor competed with the distant whistle of a train. The father caught himself laughing at a neighbor's silly joke and, seconds later, felt a pang of guilt. The mother squeezed his hand from behind, that little squeeze that says, it's okay. Life doesn't demand loyalty to sadness, it asks for a commitment to care. Gilmar went through a phase of deeper silence. Sometimes in the middle of his work he would remember the texture of the wet fabric, the way the logo had appeared, and he would have to take a deep breath. He talked to his wife, who suggested they spend a night away from the noise of the construction. They went to his sister's house. In Parangaba, they slept under a clay tile roof, the rain hitting it in a different way. He woke up feeling better. He returned to the site with a firm step and for the first time sat on the concrete bench at the end of his shift. He didn't think, he just sat. The wind rustled the new leaves of the Kixabera tree. He stayed for 3 minutes and then went on his way. A local geography teacher invited the father to speak, not about the case, but about how to navigate the city with care in an outdoor class with maps and the sun in their eyes. He spoke of the edges where asphalt turns to dirt, of the stretch of avenue that is a border between celebration and emptiness, of the places without cameras, of the habit of setting a meeting point. He spoke little, directly, without a tone of panicked warning. At the end, the students gathered around, asking more about the neighborhood than about the case. That was the best part. To transform the story into a lesson of effective geography, not a scare tactic, was a way of giving purpose to the pain. At the cemetery, on a dry, windy afternoon, the mother found two young women leaving a flower. They were twins, younger, with curly hair and t-shirts of a band she didn't recognize. They said they had followed the case since they were little, that they wanted to say hello and to thank them for having learned from the story to never separate at a concert. The mother held both their hands, one in each of hers, and felt something reorganize inside her. It wasn't consolation, it was an agreement. May other pairs have long, ordinary endings. May they come home tired on the bus and laugh at the puddle that dirties their white sneakers. That night, in the backyard, the wind cut across the dirt road of the alley beside the house and brought the smell of the brush. The father looked up at the sky, dotted with the few stars visible between the wires. He asked for nothing, complained of nothing. He gave a wordless thanks for having a place to put both the pain and the affection. The backpack between them, now embroidered on the glass of the headstone and imprinted on the memory of the neighborhood, was no longer just a symbol of loss. It had also become a kind of map, a reminder that even when the world swallows you whole, we insist on crossing it together. When the initial novelty of the tragedy faded, what remained was the work of living with the questions. The father had learned to ask them without turning the house into a permanent command post. It was enough that, from time to time, he would pick up the thread of some memory and stretch it into its proper place. He tried not to invent people or dialogue. He anchored each hypothesis in a detail on the map, in a habit of his daughters, in a rhythm of the city. One possibility that fit without effort was that of a legitimate shortcut that became a trap. Someone with a vest or a makeshift ID badge opens a side gate, offering a clearer path, and the two of them, tired of the pushing and shoving, accept. Outside, on the back avenue, the light is different, and the city at that hour reveals its empty pockets. A small car pulls up, offering a short ride to the bus stop. It doesn't require a fight or an alarm. It only requires misplaced trust and 2 kilometers of opportunity. The lot with the low wall does the rest of the sad math. Another possible scene which the father faced without punishing himself was that of an accident that turns into a cover-up. A hit and run at a clumsy exit, a collision with no witnesses, frightened people who choose to hide their mistake instead of calling for help. In 2010, the vacant lot was an easy silence. One could dig there without a neighbor getting up from his porch chair. This version doesn't point a finger, but it exposes a common weakness. The rush to get rid of a problem, the cowardice of not owning up to one's own failure. The earth, generous in its swallowing, does the rest. The hypothesis of opportunistic violence, also plausible, he treated with the respect a family owes itself. There was no need to put harsh words on the table every day. It was enough to acknowledge that a big city carries people willing to use the gaps in an event, to cross the path of someone who just wants to go home. If that was what happened, the silence that remained explains little and hurts deeply. Not because one doesn't know it exists, but because there, on that Sunday, the lives of 2 17-year-olds collided with the worst version of another. There was still one detail that lingered in his notebook since 2010. The uncompleted call at 5:48 p.m. For the father, it became a symbol of the almost. They almost warned someone, almost spoke, almost asked for a hug on their return. It's a cruel mark. At the same time, it is a tool for humanity. Every time he thinks about it, he reinforces his own habit of answering the phone when someone calls on their way home, of arranging a code word with his nephews and nieces when they go to a concert, of remembering that a failing cell signal is also a city infrastructure that needs to be improved. The almost becomes a practical decision for the next person. The mother, more given to building shelters than lines of reasoning, chose the contours of the bedroom as her pedagogy. She left a card with discreet instructions taped to the inside of the wardrobe. Charge your phone beforehand, set a fixed meeting point, don't leave your friend. Be quick to distrust anyone who says, "Come on, it'll be quick." It was a mother's advice that resisted becoming a manual of fear. On the dresser, she placed, among the other photos, the image from the festival. The two of them with sunglasses, paper wristbands, a tired happiness. She changed its meaning. Instead of a relic of loss, it became a memento of joy. It isn't a lie, it's a rearrangement. When anxiety came, the father spent his energy on an exercise he had learned from the geography teacher. He would mentally redraw the city, marking the zones where he felt safe and those where extra attention was needed. Messejana, with its windswept streets, was marked with green dots. Paulino Rocha Avenue, in its quietest hours, was traced with a yellow line of caution. The imagined service corridor, a red gash across the map. This intimate cartography served two purposes: to keep fear from painting everything gray and to prevent sorrow from treading the same path until it bled. Gilmar, who had witnessed the silent schooling of this grief from a distance, found himself months later telling a new colleague when to stop the machinery. "Sometimes what the earth gives back isn't rubble," he said with a quiet authority. "It's a piece of someone's story. You stop, you call the right people, you show respect." He used no difficult words. Without realizing it, he had passed on a protocol of humanity. The young colleague nodded, tucking the words away like a folded note in his pocket. In a big city where everyone guards what they can of their own doorstep, these small acts of attention become a low fence, one that keeps out some of the bad luck. At the cemetery, among simple flowers and stones used to hold down notes, the mother learned to speak in a low voice without crying every time. She spoke of her day, of the bills, of the small things that organize a life. The beans that turned out well, a visit from her niece, the neighbor's dog that barks at nothing. She didn't expect an answer. The ritual of the living is less about asking and more about telling. It is a different kind of conversation. None of these scenes brings the comfort of a solution. What they do is return a decent boundary to the mystery. Not knowing can be a room where the air is heavy and the walls sweat, or it can be a veranda. You can't see the whole street, but you see who passes by. You hear the vendors call, you feel the shift in the wind. The father and mother chose to live on the veranda whenever they could. From there, they watched the concrete bench become part of the scenery, the warehouse creaking in the sun, the carob tree casting a thin shadow in the late afternoon. And though the question still stood like a post in the middle of the sidewalk, they learned to step around it, without bruising their shoulders on it every day. By mid-November 2024, the hot wind once again swept the streets with fine dust, and the 3 o'clock sun made the wall tiles shimmer. The new building on Paulino Rocha now had its glass curtain in the lobby. The concrete bench under the carob tree already bore the marks of those who sit and rest a hand. An old man napping, a young man waiting for a text, a girl tying her shoelace. Life had reclaimed the space unceremoniously. The father stopped a few steps away, watched for a length of time only he could measure, and walked on. He no longer needed to stay. He needed to be able to pass by. In the house in Messejana, the room was no longer an island but a hall of memories that held no weight. Photos in simple frames, a shelf with CDs, two folded black t-shirts, a backpack design embroidered on fabric and framed. The neighborhood map with a blue line tracing the path they used to take to the bus stop. The window was left open most of the day, letting the breeze stir the curtain and carry in the smell of the neighbor's lunch. On the bedside table rested a letter from a girl in Maranguape, carefully folded and unfolded. The mother had learned to read a paragraph and put it away. She didn't need to devour it all at once. She needed to chew each piece slowly. At the cemetery, the ritual became short and frequent. They would pass by, clean the plaque, change the water, and leave a cheap flower bought on the way. Sometimes the father would tell a bad joke just to see the mother smile with her brow. Sometimes they said nothing at all. There were days when the wind cut across the dirt path of the central corridor, dust rising and settling gently. There were days of surprise rain, the water drumming on the tin roof and dripping down the corners, soaking their shoelaces. On all those days, there was the certainty that the question would walk alongside them, but it no longer had to guide their hands on the steering wheel. One day, Gilmar drove down the avenue outside of work hours, his sister's daughter in the passenger seat, listening to low-volume funk on her phone. He stopped the car for 2 minutes, pointed to the carob tree, and told a condensed version of the story. This was a place that changed a lot of people's minds, he said. The girl, who knew the story from the other side of social media, nodded and offered a spontaneous respect. They drove on, the wind from the road blowing through the window, carrying the smell of dust and the thick sound of tires on the uneven asphalt. He found himself giving thanks, wordlessly, for the way the neighborhood had learned to handle the subject without turning it into a spectacle. The city, like any city, had already moved on to other headlines, but when someone new asked, the path had been laid. The photo of the two girls at the festival, the clock showing the attempted call at 5:48 p.m., the short map between the stage and the grave, the discovery by a worker who saw the KISS logo emerge from the mud, the backpack in between, the impossibility of saying what happened. It doesn't need invention to hurt, and it doesn't need a long caption to teach. The story of the Cavalcante twins settled into its exact size. Two lives without spectacle, two presences the city learned not to forget. On a late Sunday afternoon, the mother put a scratched vinyl record on the turntable, one the girls used to listen to. The sound emerged warm and cupped, as if from a seashell. The father stirred his coffee, the aroma filling the house. They looked at each other without a word and danced 2 clumsy steps on the ceramic floor, the sun drawing a luminous rectangle on the tiles. It wasn't a tribute, it was life moving on at its own pace. The music ended and the silence that remained was a good one. The wind came through the window, stirred the curtain, and made the festival photo sway slightly. For a second, it looked like a wave. If this story has touched you, and if you believe that telling a story with care can change how a city sees itself, please subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with those who need to know the case of the Cavalcante twins. Here we investigate with humanity without sensationalism, giving every detail the weight it deserves.